Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. We are back today with another couple of lost gold and silver mine stories for you. So, if you are new to the channel and like this kind of content, then definitely like and subscribe, and you will get notified when we post new videos. And now, on to today's story. Today we're going to talk about two particular stories that are in pretty close proximity to each other on either side of the Colorado River. And these stories are near Yuma, Arizona, or just north of Yuma, Arizona. So we're going to group these two stories together since they're, so close to each other. And like I said, they're north of Yuma. They are more precisely near the little town of Picacho, which is on the California side of the Colorado River. And I believe that little town or village is right next to the river. And don't confuse Picacho with Picacho Peak, which is in Arizona, northwest of Tucson. So this is another little village. So this first story that we will discuss will go over a lost silver ledge in the Trigo Mountains. This one is on the Arizona side of the Colorado River. And this location has more than one sighting by multiple people that have spotted it and not been able to relocate it. First, there was a Mexican prospector that found this ledge of silver, and he gave his ore samples to a Picacho businessman and prospector named Jose Maria Mendeville. And he said that the ledge was a day's trip north of the Silver Clip mine, which is also on the Arizona side, pretty close to the Colorado River. So Jose had been the man that discovered the rich Silver Clip mine that was producing heavily to the tune of $1 million or so from 1883 to 1887. Since Jose was heavily involved in this mine already, and the Mexican gentleman had now left the area, Jose did not get around to assaying this ore sample for some time. Once he did, he found out that the silver was very rich in this ore sample. And by the time he realized that this was a very rich ore sample, he could not find this Mexican gentleman that had given him the ore samples and had given him a few details about the location. The next person to find this ledge was a Native American man, and his name has been forgotten to time, but he had led the superintendent of the Silver Clip mine north to this ledge. And the superintendent's name was Pickenbaugh, but he was known by everyone as Pennybaker. And he was also married to a Native American woman who was said to be related to the Native American man that found the ledge. And this appears to be why the superintendent found out about this through his wife's family. So since Pennybaker was the superintendent and he worked for a salary, he could not be really away from the mine or leave the mine much, as he was pretty much owned by his company 24/7 due to his salary and his position. So he wanted to go out and look for this ledge, but he had to buy his time. And then eventually he was moved from the Silver Clip mine to the Harquahala mine when the Silver Clip closed. So he never did make it back to the area. After he retired to Los Angeles, he eventually decided he had to go back and try to locate this silver ledge again. And he made many attempts, but he had no luck finding it again himself. In the 1880s, the leading cattleman in the Yuma, Arizona area, whose name was Santiago Lopez, he was driving his cattle through Clip Wash from the Colorado River to a spot a couple miles from the Silver Clip mine. Once he got to a fork in the trail a couple miles from the mine, according to Desert Magazine, May 1957, Santiago said about the fork in the trail, quote, "Here the cattle trail took the sidewash, went through a pass in low hills just to the north of Clip Mountain, and then entered a basin at the head of a west branch of Yuma Wash," unquote. Somewhere near the cattle trail near Clip Mountain is where Lopez found this ledge of silver. After he sold his cattle in Yuma, he tried to relocate or retrace his route, but he could never find the ledge again. Another incident of another party that apparently found this same ledge of silver was with a man named Julian Parra. And Julian was the son of Feliciano, I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name, Feliciario Parra. And this man was the one who discovered the mesquite diggings in the Chocolate Mountains in Southern California. And we discussed this mine during our story about Tuberculosis Slim. So Julian had liked to prospect more near the Colorado River Valley, and he found the silver ledge, and he marked it with some kind of a marker, and obviously wanted to try to find his way back to this location. It doesn't say exactly what kind of a marker, or if he erected a bunch of stacked stones or something to denote this location. And then he took a sample of the ore, and it was determined that this ore was richer than the ore that was coming out of the Silver Clip mine. So he made mental note where this was on the trail, and like I said, he marked it in some way so he could try to come back to it. And after he had more mining supplies and stuff like that, he could not find the location again. The last sighting of this ledge was in 1951 by a group of prospectors. They were Earl Kerr, Sumner Farrar, and George Converse. Earl was the main one who saw the ledge and took an ore sample. And Earl had eventually told Harold Waite of Desert Magazine that the ledge is, quote, "on the contact between the andesite and red granite. You can see it from a half a mile away. Going over a saddle, it stands up in the air about 4 feet, and it's about 15 feet wide and shows up for about 30 feet, unquote. So apparently the silver vein was very large, and Kerr mainly took just one sample. His sample actually didn't assay out very rich, but he thought the vein was very, very big and worth going back to, and if this was the same vein, apparently other people had taken samples of it that had assayed out pretty well. So maybe he didn't grab the best ore sample from the richest part of the vein. But he planned to go back, and unfortunately Earl died suddenly fairly soon after, and no one else that he was prospecting with that day had really paid attention to Earl's find. Maybe they saw his ore sample and they didn't think it looked that rich, and they never went to examine the entire long vein of the ore to determine that there may have been much better areas to take a sample from, or that they needed to denote where this particular vein was. So the other gentleman that Earl was prospecting with, they didn't pay attention or didn't really know exactly where Earl found this particular ledge at, as they were all prospecting and going in different directions. So that is that particular story of the silver ledge in the Trigo Mountains, somewhere on the Arizona side. So I told you that we have another story from this area that is just across the Colorado River on the California side. This story was provided to writer Harold Waite, who wrote about it in Desert Magazine in December of 1958. And the gentleman that told the story to Desert Magazine was an old man named Ed Rochester. And he told the story of a lost gold ledge. Ed's story starts in 1910 or 1911. He couldn't remember for sure what year it was when this story took place, but either way, it's not super critical to the story. It was either 1910 or 1911. And Ed had come to the area near Picacho on the Colorado River on the California side. And apparently there were a few spots around here where you could take a ferry across the river, and Picacho was one of them. And anyhow, I believe the Colorado River wasn't rough at this point. It was a lot more smooth and calm and easier to cross the river in these areas. So anyhow, Ed had been camped near the river, and it appears that he was camping downriver of Picacho, somewhere in the area that would now be covered by the lake behind Imperial Dam, which was not on the river at that point. I believe Imperial Dam wasn't constructed until the late 1930s, maybe 1938 or so. So you could camp closer to the river. It wasn't a lake yet at this point. There was no dam there. There was a dam further downriver. The Laguna Dam was there. I think it was built around 1905 or so. But later on, there would be another dam built and another lake. But at this point, Ed is camping pretty close to the shores of the Colorado River. He's on the California side. And none of this really matters that much, as the discovery that we're going to talk about was in the nearby mountains. The discovery is not underwater or anything like that, just Ed's campsite that he would have been camping at this point that he was telling the story about when this occurred. His campsite is now at the bottom of the lake. So anyhow, so Ed told this story about when he was camping near the river. There was an old gentleman, which he called the Old Dutchman, an old Dutchman prospector. So usually when people called someone an old Dutchman back then, it meant an old German prospector was typically what that meant. Same thing with the Lost Dutchman gold mine. He was a German gentleman. Anyhow, separate people, separate situations and locations, but Ed refers to this guy as the Old Dutchman prospector, and he came into his camp next to the Colorado River. Like we said, it was on the California side. So this Old Dutchman comes into Ed's camp, and he came into camp with 2 burros and a large, heavy cart. It doesn't give us a lot of details about the cart. So anyhow, this old gentleman comes into camp. He asks for some food and drink, as he had been in the canyons, and he had said that his burros or his pack animals had gotten into his food box, and they ate and destroyed and scattered his remaining food. So he told Ed that once this happened, he knew he needed to get back to civilization and resupply. And he told Ed that he had just found a nice ledge of gold shortly before that, and he was mining this gold when this mishap happened with the food. So the Old Dutchman gave a few pieces of his gold ore to pay for his hospitality, to pay Ed for his hospitality and kindness, and for payment to help ferry him across the river with his remaining supplies and his pack animals. So Ed said he did not ferry across the cart. So apparently him and the old Dutchman decided instead to store the old cart on the Colorado side of the river, and they decided to conceal it in the reeds or the weeds near the river, but it was apparently concealed fairly well. And this was likely probably due to the fact that this cart likely made going a lot slower and everything, and without the cart, with just a couple of pack animals, Ed probably, or not Ed, but the old Dutchman prospector probably figured he could make better time without the cart, and that he would resupply and come back and get the cart and then go back into the mountains and not have the cart with him the whole time. And it probably would also make it quicker for him to get back to, civilization or general store or whatever, to get, food and supplies and drink and whatever he wanted to do. It would make it a lot easier going for him. And the old Dutchman had told Ed that he intended to go back to Quartzsite, which is north of there, also close to the Colorado River. So he intended to go back to Quartzsite, Arizona, to pay off William Scott. And William Scott was a storekeeper there who had grub-staked the old Dutchman, or provided him with goods and supplies and stuff like that in exchange for a part of anything the Dutchman may have found. So the old Dutchman intended to get back to Quartzsite, pay off the gentleman that had supplied him with a bunch of gold, and then gather up a party to go back into these mountains and mine the gold. And likely the storekeeper may have been involved in this, or may have still had a stake in the mine at that point. Anyhow, this was the old Dutchman's plan. Go there, pay off the gentleman that helped him, and get a party to go back into these mountains and mine more gold. So as they parted ways, Ed headed south into Yuma. So Ed is heading south into Yuma. The old Dutchman is heading north. They're both on the Arizona side at this point. The old Dutchman's heading north toward Quartzsite. And Ed made his way into a store in the Yuma area, the Sanguinetti store, where he cashed in 3 pieces of the ore for $62 and a big celebratory cigar. So eventually, a few months down the line, Ed had been in Quartzsite, and he looked up the storekeeper, William Scott. He remembered the name that the old Dutchman had mentioned, and he found him, and he found out that the old Dutchman never made it to the store, and he had actually never been seen by anyone in the area again. So it appeared that Ed may have been the last person to see him alive. And this shocked Ed, and as he eventually made his way back south, he decided that he would cross the Colorado River to the California side, and he would look for the big heavy cart and see if it was still there. And he did find it. It was still hidden in the weeds where they had both hidden it. So it appeared that the old Dutchman never made it to Quartzsite, so it wasn't like he made it to Quartzsite and then just didn't pay off his grub staker and decided to head back to the mine himself. It looks like he never made it there and never came back for his cart and his other supplies that were in the cart, since they were still there hidden in the weeds. And Ed had said that any signs of the wheel tracks from the cart now were erased by the weather. Too much time had passed by, so there was no retracing the tracks that may have been left by the cart. And anyhow, so all Ed had now was just his recollection of what the old Dutchman had told him about his journey after he left the ledge due to the pack animals devouring his remaining food. Ed also knew that this cart had been very limited because the The old Dutchman being in the canyons with this cart would not have been able to get into any areas with limited or low accessibility. So he knew these mountains were pretty rough on the west side of the Colorado here, and it was definitely going to limit where the old Dutchman could have gone with this cart. So, with that being said, Ed remembered that the old Dutchman said of his trip after leaving that gold ledge that he soon came to a little basin fairly high up in the hills, and from it he could see only a little green spot of the Colorado River bottomland. In a southerly direction from here, when he looked, he saw some smoke, which he thought was likely coming from the Laguna Dam. And I believe the Laguna Dam had been in operation for a few years. There likely was a lake starting to build up behind it, but there maybe were still workers on this site. And as he tried to make his way to the Laguna Dam site, where he reasoned workers would be there and he would be able to get some food and water and assistance there, he was starting to head that direction, and he ran into the Senator Wash. And here he found that the walls were too steep to accommodate his pack animals and his cart. So he instead had to turn east and head toward the Colorado River that way in, I guess, a more manageable canyon area. And this is where he ran into Ed, and this is where the beginning of the story picks up. So that is the story of the lost gold ledge that is in the mountains somewhere just a little west of the Colorado River. I guess it would be south, maybe somewhere south of Picacho, somewhere west of the lake that is now behind the Imperial Dam. So if you like these stories, you can leave some more comments or anything in the comments. Just keep them nice and civil, and we will see you again soon with another story.